All right, welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Well, it's still the newspaper review on Daybreak this beautiful morning. And just to analyze some of these stories that we reeled out to you, we have our guest analyst in the studio, and his Mukhtar Suleiman, a public affairs analyst this morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been 2 Mondays.
Yes, it has. It's good to have you back.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's begin with Daily Trust. And the lead story talks about anti-money laundering and have SMEs decry registration hurdles. Now, nothing seems to be going well, when it comes to small and medium businesses, from the economic crunch, and then most of them have been unable to start up and also maintain their businesses. What's your take on this?
First of all, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Before I even go neck deep into that, congratulations to Hamza.
Yes, congratulations to him.
Daily Trust on that. Yeah. For SMEs, I thought the passing of the bill earlier this year was going to be like a strong win for the small medium enterprises in the country, but it's quite funny how most of the time there's always an issue when Nigeria has a lot of bottlenecks that actually thwarts growth, especially with the fact that we know that SMEs contribute for more than 60% of the Nigerian economy. But on the flip side of that, we know that people set up small businesses to rip off people. That's also another thing. So if you're not willing to go through this system and the painful process, to set up a legitimate business, then you're not willing to probably do the day-to-day. Does it affect the honest people? Yes, I think it does. But at the end of the day, these rules are in place to actually ensure that there is strength in the system, to ensure that there's some level of honesty and some accountability from small, medium enterprises in the country.
Sometimes when bills are, put out there, the problem is always in implementation. And of course, when you implement, that's when enforcement comes in. But entrepreneurs are not finding it very funny, just like Dashin said, they're not finding it funny in the country. And you just wonder where we're going with all of this. Now, for individuals who want this to work, what do you think they can do differently to make all of this work if they really want to make a milestone in the small and medium enterprises in Nigeria?
I think we need to, one of the easiest ways I find that you can get things working in Nigeria is before you dive neck deep into it, go to CAC, go and make all the inquiries you need to make and gather it's like going to an embassy to get a visa. If you go in there, you miss a document, you go back, there's always going to be that back and forth. And for you to avoid the back and forth, you should go to them, ask, make a list, and make sure that you have everything in place before at that point, when you go in with everything that you need, and then there is an issue from the CAC itself, they will know that there's a problem. But also, I think one of the things that have actually thwarted registration is also the new KAMA law that came out as well earlier in the year. It was absurd, honestly. That's the shortest way I can actually explain the KAMA law. There are certain issues with certain names that doesn't have any form of justification, especially with registering companies or registering NGOs. Some people feel like that KAMA law is a clamp down on the government on the rise of civil society and closing down the civic space. And you cannot help but agree, because the moment you have something like advocacy in your name, I'm going to NGOs now, the moment you have advocacy in your name, there's a problem. The moment you have accountability, there's a problem. It's the moment you have center for problem. So we need to, I think the government needs to review that KAMA law, especially, even if not for NGOs, but for the sake of the small SMEs.
When you talk about reviews, I know a lot of people came together to put this act together. And when it's out there, you know what happens in this country. It's very difficult for people to go back and then sit down just like they did in the first time, put in this law, making it an act, and then coming back to review. It might take a lot of time, but do you think that we should maybe adjust to some of the camel laws, because I've studied that law and it's kind of tilted to the other side. It's not favoring some side, like you said, civil societies and of course NGOs are not favored in that act. Do you think that we should be doing something differently, judging the fact that, you know, they've enjoyed some of the things they've enjoyed for a very long time, and then now we're seeing a change?
When you put it that way, it sounds as if something is good for a very long time, then it should be bad for some time. So that's how it sounds. But
is it that bad?
no, not really. I wouldn't say it's that bad, but it's not encouraging either. The civil society space, now let's speak to that context, has been a very instrumental space, especially when it comes to protecting the sanctity of our democracy in this country. There are 1,001 things. Yes, we can always argue about the politics of the civil society space, the civic space, but we cannot take away the impact that that space have actually made in Nigeria. There are 1,001 things that the civic space have actually opened up and ensured that Nigerians are aware of that they might otherwise not be aware of. Most of us never understood budget until budget started breaking down the budget. Most of the time, into infographics and the rest of it. Most of us never understood certain rights until SERAP started pushing for those rights, suing the federal government, in fact, and winning some cases. Most of us never knew that was possible to actually do that. So there are so many other things, like a typical, and that thing is, for my where I work, we currently started breaking down like what the BVAS is. A lot of people never knew that that's what the BVAS could do. So the civil space have actually been very helpful, and if we want to clamp down on it, well, I feel like there are other ways you could actually do it as opposed to antagonizing. Let me put it that way, because Nigeria has a knack for antagonizing with laws, especially when we come up with new laws that we, in the past, maybe we don't have good rapport with that crop of people. So that needs to really be looked at. I don't think the Kama law is entirely bad. Nothing is ever entirely bad, but I feel like if it's going to thwart growth and close a space too tight-knotted, then it needs to be relooked at. There are other ways to actually ensure checks and balances, especially for, then what do you do about the ones that are already existing? Do you go and close them down as well?
Well,
I think it applies to others
we'll
too.
actually dwell more on that, in the next hour, because it's actually one of our major discussions this morning. All right, so let's move on to more stories. Now, what's your thought on Adeleke of Osun, Governor Adeleke of Osun State, going all the way, changing, the appellation, sacking his predecessors, employees and all that? I
think that's politics. At the end of the day, you'll be very myopic to not expect that will happen. Of course, there are people who worked for him to get to the office, and they need to be rewarded with those positions, especially if they actually meet the bare minimum competencies. Politics are always politics. That's just something I've always said. So I was following up some of the tweets that were coming out yesterday. Some people were, how do I put this? They were taken aback by it. They were disgusted by it. I was like, I don't understand it. Why are you angry about it? There were people in Goodluck Jonathan's government that were all fired. Most of them were fired by the time President Buhari took office in 2015. In fact, even after the 2019 elections, some people were changed. It's politics. It's just, that's why they call it political appointed positions. At the end of the day.
So should we be expecting something like that in Rivers State? Because we've seen a lot of appointment of aides in the last few weeks, and
at the end of the day, it depends on who wins. Because if your party wins, if the current party wins, of course there's going to be status quo. There's going to be continuation. If Oyetola had won, some people from Ralph Arugishola's camp stayed back were retained in Oyetola's camp when he won. So if he had won, there would have been continuity. But it's politics. I think that's normal.
All right, let's move on to election matters. A few weeks ago, there was a story of some of the electoral offices being burnt down, and now we're having INEC in Ebonyi office, being razed, and 340 ballot boxes, 130 cubicles, and PVCs destroyed, and this is just a few months before the elections.
I think the agitations in the East, the agitators rather in the East, needs to understand that democracy is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And unless you go through the rigors of that electioneering process, you would not be able to have a say in the structures of government. So if you continue to attack the institution that is supposed to ensure that there's legitimacy in the next government, then you are hurting your chances to ensure that your votes count, that what you think should happen at the end of the day. Attacking government offices, burning down PVCs disenfranchises your people, not the entire country. Because we've made the election space a we versus them situation. There's an authorization of reality going on, and people feel like what happens there does not affect us here. But it does. There's a cross-cutting effect for most of these things. So if you say you are displeased by the current stand of things, alhamdulillah, come next year, you have the option to either remove or keep people back in place. The worst thing you can do is to ensure that people do not vote. Allow them to go out and vote. The best thing they could have done was to educate them on who they think they should vote for. Of course, at the end of the day, we are all partisan because there's no neutrality. There can be neutrality in campaign, there's no neutrality in voting. By the time we go there to the polls in 2023, we are going to vote for one person. Who would that, if you vote for two, you've nulled your vote. So who would that person be? That's open for debate. But I think those agitators need to learn, understand this, and come together and decide who their candidate would be, throw their weight and support for it, encourage people in their local communities to go out and vote for those candidates, as opposed to finding a way to actually mess up the election process.
Looking at it generally, this is not the first time, let's say in the space of 3-4 weeks, we've had INEC offices being razed down by fire. It happened in Ogun, in Osun State. And putting it together, we have more than 60,000 PVCs affected. And then we have the new numbers added to it. But one thing INEC keeps saying is that we have backlog of these names and we're going to produce these PVCs. People who have, put in for PVCs have not collected their PVCs, and then we have PVCs that have been produced being razed down by fire. Do you think that INEC can meet up before 25th of February next year?
I can't speak to the countenance of INEC or the competencies of them to meet up or not meet up. I feel like they have all the resources that they actually need to actually do that. Election is it's a madhouse logistic. You cannot, if you've ever tried to, maybe in school, try to organize elections or be a part of the process, you can imagine how it goes. It takes a lot. Then imagine having to do that for 200 million people across 36 states. I do not envy INEC right now. I think they are in a very precarious position and they're hanging on a very thin thread, because everybody or some people are doing as much as they can to ensure that they fail, just to do the I told you so stuff. But I really hope that they can actually meet up, because the current INEC chairman has actually gone out of his way to see how much he can to protect the sanctity of the system, to stay away from the media as much as he can, and also dive neck deep into his job. Just, if not for anything, to also protect his own personal integrity. And that needs to also be applauded. But I really hope and I pray that we, the citizens, do not add to the already existing frustration that the man is already having with trying to set up these systems and these structures. We need to find a way to support them, and because at the end of the day, it is for our own benefit as well. It's a collective benefit. That's why I said the authorization of realities that are happening is quite alarming, because across line, all of us, we are all affected by the actions or inactions of this institution. Right now, this is the time where INEC and the INEC chairman is the commander-in-chief of the Federation. We need to support him to ensure that we can actually have a free, fair, and violence-free elections come 2023.
All right, so let's take a look at city and crime. We have so many stories here, very interesting ones, by the way. But there's this one about a woman and a teen robbing shops with toy guns in Ogun State. You want to comment on that?
Okay, I've not seen that story, but it's a very funny one. I've not seen the story yet, but I think it goes to tell you how illiterate we are when it comes to rifles, when it comes to when it comes to weapons. You can't try that in the US. Everybody carries a gun to start with. If yours is a toy gun, I'm sorry, you're not going to live to tell the story of how you robbed with a toy gun, so to speak. So I remember that when I was growing up, somebody once robbed us with a stick. Yeah, and we didn't know. We thought it was actually a gun until in the morning when we went out of the house, and then we saw the stick on the ground. My dad felt very embarrassed. His ego was bruised.
Yes. So what is the stick carved as a gun?
Yeah, it was carved as a gun. It was black. But it was at night. It was late at night. We didn't know. Nobody thought to look at it if there was even a hole coming out from the front of the. We just reacted based on the fact that something was pointed at us. But like I said earlier, it just goes to speak to the fact that we don't know much about guns in this country, which is also a good thing to start with. But crime needs to. There needs to be a clampdown on crime. If there's increase in hunger in the country, an increase in poverty and starvation, of course there's going to be a skyrocket of crime. That needs to also be checked by the government, and especially with the police force, because just 2 weeks ago, NBS released the statistics of poverty rate in the country, and it was quite alarming, and we're shocked by those numbers. So I think we need to really do more to ensure safety for everybody else.
Okay, so let's move on to another big story for today. We're expecting that the Abuja-Kaduna train resumes today. Yeah. There have been a lot of preparations made. Dasha was part of the people who traveled that route. It wasn't easy, and then, we're back. But she came back with a report that the resumption date has been extended, probably by a week. Do you think that, that's the right decision to make, judging from the fact that, new guidelines for boarding the train has been introduced?
Yeah, I think I was going through the guidelines yesterday. One of it is the introduction of the NIN before you buy tickets. I'm very conflicted. First things first, let me say this. I'm often very conflicted with how much our government abuses the NIN. That is supposed to serve as our social security number. It is not a public thing. I'm not supposed to be just handing it out to everybody that wants it. I think we need to really check that. There needs to be other means of control or checks and balances, or how do we do data access, data sharing within the government structure? So we need to, this is where the problem of not having a centralized data bank for the government is actually a big problem. That needs to also be checked. Even if I give you my NIN, what are you going to do with it? What information can you access with it when there's no centralized system for you to actually mop it? Because at the end of the day, there is more information assigned to my international passport than there is assigned to my NIN currently, as it is in the country. So that needs to also be checked. I actually think the extension might be a good thing, because the government did not go out of its way to tell us clearly, aside from the guideline, what are the security protocols? How can you ensure that there's consistency in the security protocols? What are the accountability mechanisms to hold people accountable? Should, in case anything go, we're not hoping anything should go wrong, but on the account that it does, or if there's a slight change, what is your backup of your backup of your backup plan to ensure safety? Because people are actually finding it difficult to actually trust the rail system again, but it needs to start, and then we need to see what these protocols are and how consistent they are before we can actually.
The minister actually said that it's for security reasons. It will not be revealed. But aside that, some people are also conflicted at the fact that you're saying for security measures, passengers need to have their NIN and all that for profiling. But when the train was attacked, it was attacked from the outside. How do you secure the lives and property of people from the outside? But I think one of the measures is, they have security personnel around.
There's always been security personnel on the train. I don't think
not on the train, like outside just around
the tracks.
Well,
of course, it doesn't cover the whole route.
It doesn't cover the whole route. We've always said that I've forgotten the name of that village where the attacks usually happen most of the time. Regina. Turn it into a military barrack. I think Malam Erifai said that 1,001 times. I also back him up for that idea, because that place is not safe. Most of the attacks that happen even on the road or everywhere, it's within that route. And this is like the midway point from Abuja to Kaduna. So if they can actually sort it out and put more military personnel around those areas, maybe they can actually thwart the future plans or future attacks. But aside from even that, saying people should use NIN to log into to go into the train, like you have actually said, does not actually protect people from the outside. Even if you station policemen outside or military men outside, what resource are you giving them to ensure that they can actually also protect themselves first? Because if I cannot protect myself, I cannot protect other people. So what are the we need to see the structures. Even if you're not going to tell us what the protocols are, there should be infrastructural change to ensure more security.
Some people might want to argue that, if I present my NIN, some of the people who perpetrated that attack could have been inside the train, and then others outside the train.
Don't forget that when you register for the train, especially if you're going to, we're all mostly paying online. We had our BVN attached to that registration process as well. What did they do with that information? How did they use that information at the end of the day when the attack happened? Nigeria needs to understand that just by coming up with new fancy words does not make it any less stupid than the former one was. So we need to actually check those things, and the government needs to sit up. That's just how I'm going to say it. They need to really, really sit up. I don't know who's going to win the next general elections, but I also don't envy them as well, because they're coming in to come and diffuse a ticking bomb. We have issues from all strata and ramifications of the country, and the annoying part of the whole of the elections coming forward is that we have unchecked grievances from the camp of each of the party that is running, that's from their supporters. So it means that if one party wins eventually, that grievance might escalate into something else. We don't know what it is, but that's a threat to national security. The government should look into that and ensure that there's actually security measures to actually take care of that, because we don't want a new crop of people sprouting up with their own grievance because the election did not go the way they wanted it to go. We want a situation where at the end of the day, whoever wins, there is a strategy in place to ensure acceptability of the result. That's also one thing that my office will be working on. We're discussing it some time ago, because there's a new dive we are going into for this election process. We're going into a new, because of the Electoral Act, we're going into a new process. The only people that have actually tested the process are Ekiti and Osun State. And we've not tested it on that massive scale of a national election. So there are certain things that people need to know. If we don't educate them now about those things, then the Electoral Act is going to be a curse to us at the end of the day. Things as basic as, like I've said earlier, things as basic as what's the BVAS, what is electronic transmission of results, so that people understand these things, accept them before we're going to, if they don't, there's going to be a big problem.
All right, well, let's quickly take a look at the front page. That's the big story on Punch newspaper, talking about NNPC petrol price, without subsidy, saying petrol price without subsidy is 400 naira per litre.
It's still cheap.
Talking about fuel scarcity, and nothing seems to be,
if
working.
Petrol price without fuel subsidy is 400 naira, that is still very, very cheap. I think you should know this. I am against fuel subsidy. I supported Peter Obi when he said it's a way of just stealing money from this country. Remove the fuel subsidy. But like I have always said, my grievance with the fuel subsidy structure is that you cannot tell me to buy at 400 naira per litre and still use the same money, the same product to generate primary source of power for myself. If you want to remove the fuel subsidy, good and fine, do that. But put in place structures that ensure that the common man does not have to suffer. Ensure that there's steady power in the country. Ensure that there's a good intercity network, transport network, especially with the train. Just to ensure that whoever is going to go and buy at 400 naira per litre just wants to cruise around, and because they have a private car. A friend of mine that lives in Canada said the transport network is so good. He bought a car for 2 months. He only drove it twice before he sold it. He didn't see a need for it anymore. So at the end of the day, because he said he was spending more by driving the car than he was by taking public transport, and public transport was very effective and efficient, so he didn't need the car anymore. So I think we need to actually, the government needs to actually do something about that. So if you want to remove the fuel subsidy, Matala, I don't have a problem with it personally anyway, and I'm sure that a lot of people don't. But if you can put in place certain structures that ensure that me and the rest of us in the bottom of the ladder do not get to suffer for it, then we're good.
I think we should do something about the fuel scarcity and the fuel queues resurfacing again. Driving in this morning, I saw a lot of
Did it ever go off? It never went off.
For just a week, it just reduced.
It just kept fluctuating. I think it's because a lot of people bought a lot of fuel and kept it, so they didn't need to go to filling station for a while. So
no, it was actually available in that time.
It was available.
Just for
the problem, because I know that some filling stations have increased by a few.
Yeah,
increased by 5 naira,
and the government
10
isn't
naira.
saying anything about it.
Well, welcome to the government.
So does it mean that we're approaching that era where we don't need to have subsidy included in petrol? Because some people are selling above 200 naira.
And as it is right now, a lot of other people don't mind buying you know, at an expensive
And
rate,
that's-
as long as there's availability.
available.
That's what the markets, part of what the marketers actually wanted. But then again, I don't entirely blame them. I was speaking to a friend of mine some time ago about the fuel subsidy, some weeks ago, the fuel scarcity, and why it was consistent. And he was explaining to me because he works with one of the filling stations in the country as their head of business. He said the government has not paid the subsidy since this year, especially for transport subsidy. You're expecting people to spend their money and their resource to drive these fuels from Lagos or those border cities in Nigeria, especially down south, and bring them down to Abuja or up north. You're not paying them anything. They're not selling it at a very good price. So at the end of the day, they are running at a deficit. It's not fair. You are the one that promised the subsidy, but you're not paying it. So the marketers are not making the money that they should be making. The drivers themselves are not making the money that they should be. Everybody who invests in the oil sector are losing money. So, and you actually passed the fuel subsidy in the budget, but never released the cash for that. And we're going into December where money goes back into the system again. So I think the government has really not been fair. Honestly, that's just the best way to put it without sounding insulting. So they've not been fair, and they need to actually look inwards. Let me put it that. Let me sound like a motivational speaker now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mukhtar Suleiman. It was an absolute pleasure, as usual, having you on Daybreak this morning.